Now we have reached one of the most famous teachings of Horace. If someone asks, according to Horace, what is the purpose of poetry? This slide gives the complete answer. Horace believed that poetry should do two things at the same time. It should teach people. It should also give them pleasure. He expresses this idea in a famous Latin phrase, Utile Dulce. Some books also write it as Dulce e Utile. Both expressions communicate the same central idea. One emphasizes the useful and the pleasant, while the other emphasizes the pleasant and the useful. The meaning remains the same. A great literary work should both instruct and delight. Look carefully at the picture on the slide. At the top, we see a capsule. Inside the capsule we can imagine medicine mixed with honey. This picture beautifully explains Horace's philosophy. Medicine is useful. Honey is sweet. Children usually dislike medicine because it tastes bitter. But when parents mix medicine with honey, the child happily takes it. The child enjoys the sweetness while also receiving the benefit of the medicine. Horace says poetry should work exactly like that. The reader should enjoy reading it. At the same time, the reader should become wiser. That is the perfect poem. Understanding. Utile. Let us first understand the word utile. The slide explains it as profit or teach. Here, profit does not mean earning money. It means benefit, something useful, something valuable. Horace believed literature should improve the reader. After reading a poem, a person should learn something. Perhaps the poem teaches honesty. Perhaps it teaches courage. Perhaps it teaches kindness. Perhaps it teaches wisdom. Perhaps it helps us understand human nature. Whatever the lesson may be, good literature should make us better human beings. Think about stories your parents or grandparents told you when you were young. Many of those stories were entertaining, but they also ended with a lesson. For example, The Boy Who Cried Wolf. The story is interesting, but it also teaches us never to lie repeatedly. Or think about Aesop's fables. Animals speak like humans. The stories are enjoyable, yet every story teaches an important moral lesson. That is exactly what Horace means by utile. Literature should educate without becoming boring. Understanding. Dulce. Now let us understand the second word. The slide explains dulce as pleasant or delight. This is equally important. Horace never wanted literature to become a dry moral lecture. Imagine your school teacher reading only rules for 1 hour without any examples or stories. Would students enjoy the class? Probably not. Now imagine another teacher explaining the same lesson through stories, examples, humor, and interesting discussions. Students learn more because they enjoy learning. Horace says poetry should work like the second teacher. It should delight the reader. The language should be beautiful. The emotions should touch the heart. The rhythm should sound pleasant. The imagination should capture our attention. Readers should enjoy reading. If literature only teaches but never delights, readers may stop reading. Therefore, delight is just as important as instruction. Why must both be together? Now let us ask an important question. Can literature only teach? Yes. A textbook teaches. A rule book teaches. A law book teaches. But people usually do not read them for pleasure. Can literature only entertain? Yes. Some stories make us laugh for a few minutes. After that, we forget them. Horace says the greatest literature combines both. It entertains us while quietly teaching us something valuable. Think of a delicious meal. Suppose the food is very healthy but tastes terrible. People may avoid eating it. Now suppose the food tastes wonderful but contains no nutrition. People enjoy eating it, but it does not improve their health. The best meal is both tasty and nutritious. Similarly, the best literature is both beautiful and beneficial. This is Horace's ideal, the medicine and honey example. The image of medicine and honey became one of the most famous explanations in literary criticism. Imagine a mother giving medicine to a child. The medicine is bitter. The child refuses to drink it. So the mother mixes it with honey. Now the child willingly drinks the medicine. The sweetness hides the bitterness. But the medicine still heals the body. Horace says poetry should follow exactly this method. The beautiful language, the rhythm, the imagination, the story, and the emotions are like the honey. The wisdom, the moral lesson, the practical advice, and the understanding of life are like the medicine. Readers come for the sweetness. Without even realizing it, they receive the medicine. That is why poetry becomes both enjoyable and meaningful. Examples from literature. Let us understand this idea with some famous literary examples. Shakespeare's King Lear is a powerful tragedy. The play entertains us with dramatic scenes, memorable characters, and beautiful language. But it also teaches important lessons about pride, family relationships, greed, loyalty, and human suffering. Similarly, George Orwell's Animal Farm is an interesting story about animals. Readers enjoy the story, but underneath the entertainment lies a powerful lesson about political power, corruption, and dictatorship. Even children's stories often follow Horace's principle. Stories like The Tortoise and the Hare entertain children through talking animals. At the same time, they teach that steady effort is often better than overconfidence. These works continue to be loved because they successfully combine instruction with delight. Horace's difference from Plato. This idea also helps us understand how Horace differs from Plato. Plato mainly judged literature by asking, does it teach morality? Horace agrees that morality is important. However, he adds another requirement. Literature should also be beautiful. People should enjoy reading it. In other words, Horace believes that good teaching becomes more effective when it is presented beautifully. That is why his theory is more balanced. He neither sacrifices pleasure for morality nor morality for pleasure. He wants both together. Why is this principle still important today? Even today, this principle guides writers across the world. Think about educational videos on YouTube. The best educational channels do not simply present facts. They use stories, animations, examples, interesting questions, humor. The audience enjoys watching while also learning. Good teachers also follow Horace's principle. They do not merely give information. They make learning enjoyable. Even motivational speeches become successful because they combine inspiration with useful advice. Without realizing it, many modern writers, teachers, filmmakers, and content creators continue to follow Horace's idea of Utile Dulce. Let us quickly revise this slide. Horace believed that the highest purpose of poetry is to combine instruction and delight. The Latin expression utile dulce, also commonly expressed as dulce e utile, means the useful and the pleasant. Utile represents the educational, moral, and practical value of literature. Dulce represents beauty, enjoyment, emotional pleasure, and artistic delight. Great literature is like medicine mixed with honey. The honey attracts the reader. The medicine improves the reader. This perfect balance between teaching and entertaining is, according to Horace, the ultimate function of poetry and one of the greatest principles in the history of literary criticism. In the next slide, we will study another important maxim of Horace, where he explains the relationship between natural talent, ingenium, and disciplined craftsmanship, ars, showing that true literary greatness requires both inspiration and hard work. Now we come to another famous principle of Horace that has influenced writers, filmmakers, and storytellers for more than 2,000 years. This principle is expressed in the Latin phrase, in medias res. Let us first learn the meaning of this phrase. The Latin words in medias res literally mean, into the middle of things. Or more simply, start the story in the middle of the action. This may sound unusual. Most people think a story should always begin at the beginning. Horace says, not necessarily. Sometimes the most powerful way to tell a story is to begin where the action is already exciting. Then, later, the writer can explain what happened before. This technique immediately captures the reader's attention. That is the central idea of this slide. Understanding the diagram. Let us first understand the picture. The slide shows two different ways of telling the same story. The first method is labeled A. The second method is labeled B. Horace compares these two methods and tells us which one is more effective. Method A, the ordinary way. Look at the top part of the diagram. The story begins with A, which represents birth. Then it moves to B, representing youth. Finally, it reaches C, which represents war. This is the normal chronological order. Everything happens according to time. Birth comes first, youth comes second, war comes last. There is nothing wrong with this method. In fact, many biographies and history books use this structure. However, Horace believes that this approach can sometimes become slow. Imagine reading a novel that spends the first 100 pages describing the hero's childhood before anything exciting happens. Some readers may lose interest before reaching the important events. Horace wants writers to avoid unnecessary delay. Method B, Horace's method. Now look at the second diagram. This is the method Horace recommends. Instead of beginning with birth, the story begins immediately with war. The reader is suddenly placed in the middle of the most exciting action. Questions immediately arise. Who is this hero? Why is this war happening? Who are these enemies? What happened before this battle? The reader becomes curious. After capturing the reader's attention, the writer slowly explains the earlier events through flashbacks, memories, conversations, or narration. Finally, the story continues toward its conclusion. This is in medias res. The reader enters the story while important events are already taking place. Why did Horace recommend this method? Now let us ask an important question. Why did Horace prefer this style? Because Horace understood something about human nature. People become interested when they have questions. Suppose someone begins telling you a story like this. Yesterday I saw a man running through the street while everyone was chasing him. Immediately, you want to know what happened. Who is the man? Why are people chasing him? What did he do? Now imagine the same story beginning like this. This man was born in a small village. His parents were farmers. He attended primary school. These details may become important later, but they do not immediately create excitement. Horace believed that writers should first awaken curiosity. Then they should satisfy that curiosity gradually. That keeps readers interested. Homer's example. The slide also mentions Homer. Why does Horace mention Homer? Because Horace greatly admired him. Horace believed Homer was one of the greatest storytellers in history. Let us consider the Iliad. Does Homer begin with the birth of Achilles? No. Does he describe Achilles' childhood? No. Does he explain every event leading to the Trojan War before the story begins? Again, no. Instead, Homer begins in the middle of the Trojan War, when the conflict is already in progress. The audience immediately enters an exciting situation. Later, through speeches, memories, and conversations, the earlier events become clear. Horace admired this technique and encouraged other epic poets to learn from Homer. Modern examples. Now let us see whether writers still use this principle today. The answer is yes, very often. Think about detective novels. Many detective stories begin with a murder. The reader does not know who committed the crime. The investigation gradually reveals what happened earlier. Or think about action films. Sometimes the first scene shows an exciting chase. Only later do we learn why the hero is running. Many modern television series also begin with a dramatic event. Then the screen shows, 3 days earlier. The story moves backward before returning to the present. This is exactly Horace's principle of in medias res. Even though these works are modern, they continue to follow a storytelling method described more than 2,000 years ago. Flashbacks. The slide also shows a box labeled flashbacks. What is a flashback? A flashback is a technique in which the story temporarily moves back in time. It allows readers to understand important events from the past. Imagine meeting a doctor who is performing a difficult surgery. Later, the story tells us how the doctor became a surgeon. That earlier part is a flashback. Or imagine a hero remembering childhood while fighting in a battle. Again, that is a flashback. Horace believed flashbacks should explain only what is necessary. They should not interrupt the story unnecessarily. The main action should continue moving forward. What is Horace teaching us? If we think carefully, Horace is giving us a lesson about storytelling itself. He says, do not waste the reader's time with unnecessary beginnings. Start where the story becomes interesting. Capture attention immediately. Then slowly provide the background information whenever it becomes necessary. This keeps readers curious from beginning to end. Notice that Horace does not say every story must begin in the middle. Rather, he says that for epic poetry, this method is often more powerful because it creates suspense and maintains interest. Why is this principle still important? Even today, writers, filmmakers, and scriptwriters continue to follow this advice. Whether someone is writing a novel, creating a movie, making a television series, or even producing a YouTube documentary, the opening is extremely important. If the beginning is slow, many viewers stop watching. If the beginning immediately creates curiosity, people continue watching because they want answers. Without realizing it, modern storytelling still follows Horace's wisdom. Let us quickly revise this slide. In medias res is a Latin phrase meaning, into the middle of things. Horace advises epic poets to begin with the main action instead of starting from the earliest events. The background story can later be explained through flashbacks, conversations, or narration. Horace praises Homer because the Iliad begins in the middle of the Trojan War rather than with Achilles' birth. This technique creates curiosity, suspense, and immediate reader involvement, making the story more engaging from the very beginning. In the next slide, we will study another important principle of Horace, where he explains that natural talent, ingenium, and disciplined training, ars, must work together, because neither inspiration nor technique alone can produce truly great literature. Now we come to another of Horace's most famous and influential ideas. This principle is expressed in the Latin phrase, ut pictura poesis. This is one of the most quoted statements in the history of literary criticism. Its literal meaning is, as is painting, so is poetry. Or in very simple words, poetry and painting are sister arts. At first, this statement may sound surprising. How can a poem and a painting be compared? One uses words, the other uses colors. One is read, the other is seen. Yet Horace says they are very similar. Let us understand why. Understanding the picture. Look carefully at the slide. On the left, we see a painter's palette full of colors. On the right, we see an ink bottle and a feather pen. These two objects represent two different artists. The painter creates beauty with colors. The poet creates beauty with words. Different materials, but the same purpose. Notice how the colors flow into the ink. This beautifully symbolizes Horace's idea. The imagination of the painter and the imagination of the poet come from the same creative mind. Only their tools are different. Poetry and painting have the same goal. Now let us understand Horace's comparison. Imagine a painter standing before a blank canvas. He slowly chooses colors. He decides where to place light, where to place shadows, which colors should appear bright, which colors should remain soft. Nothing is accidental. Every brushstroke has a purpose. Now imagine a poet sitting before a blank page. The poet also makes choices. Which word is the best? Which image is the strongest? Which sentence sounds beautiful? Which emotion should come first? Again, nothing should be accidental. Just as the painter carefully chooses colors, the poet carefully chooses words. Both artists create beauty through careful selection. That is why Horace calls them sister arts. Poetry paints with words. Now let us think about something interesting. Can words create pictures? Yes. Good poetry creates pictures inside our minds. Suppose I simply say, there was a tree. You understand the sentence, but the picture is not very clear. Now listen to this. A lonely banyan tree stood beside the silent river as the golden evening sun disappeared behind the hills. Immediately, a picture appears in your imagination. You almost feel as if you are looking at a painting. This is what Horace means. The poet does not use paint. The poet uses carefully chosen words to create mental pictures. That is why poetry is often called word painting. painting speaks without words. Now let us look at the comparison from the opposite direction. A painting tells a story without speaking. Imagine looking at a painting of an old man sitting alone in the rain. The painter never writes, he is lonely. Yet we understand the emotion. The colors, the posture, the expression, and the surroundings communicate everything. Similarly, a poet often communicates emotions without directly explaining them. Instead of saying, "The woman was sad," the poet may describe her silent tears, her empty house, or the fading light outside the window. Readers understand the sadness without being directly told. Both painting and poetry depend upon suggestion rather than explanation. Creative imagination. Now let us read the second point on the slide. It says, both are acts of creative imagination, not just mere copying. This is very important. Horace did not believe that artists simply copy reality. Instead, they transform reality. Imagine two people standing before the same mountain. One person simply takes a photograph. Another person paints the mountain. The painter chooses colors, changes the lighting, highlights certain features, and perhaps even adds emotions to the scene. The result becomes something more than a copy. Similarly, poets do not simply record facts. They transform ordinary experiences into beautiful literature. Suppose two people watch the same sunset. One simply says, "The sun has gone down." The poet writes, "The evening wrapped the sky in golden silence." Both describe the same event. But one reports, the other creates art. Horace admired this creative imagination. The importance of carefully chosen words. Now let us study the final point on the slide. It says, just as a painting uses color to beautify an image, a poem uses perfectly chosen words to beautify an idea. This sentence summarizes Horace's entire comparison. Think about a painter. Would a painter randomly throw colors onto the canvas? Certainly not. Every color is carefully selected. Every line has meaning. Every shade contributes to the whole picture. Horace says poets should work in exactly the same way. Every word matters. Every sentence should have a purpose. Nothing should be unnecessary. Sometimes changing a single word makes an entire poem more beautiful. That is why Horace repeatedly encourages poets to revise their work carefully. Beautiful poetry is created one word at a time. A modern example. Let us understand this through cinema. A film combines pictures, music, dialogue, and acting. Imagine a director filming a sunset. The camera angle, the lighting, the background music, and the colors all work together to create emotion. Now imagine a novelist describing the same sunset. The novelist cannot use a camera. Instead, the novelist uses language. If the description is powerful, readers see the same picture in their imagination. The painter uses colors. The filmmaker uses images. The poet uses words. But all three artists are trying to create the same experience. This is exactly Horace's idea. Did Horace mean that poetry and painting are identical? No. Horace did not say that poetry and painting are exactly the same. He simply says they share important similarities. Both depend on imagination. Both require skill. Both demand careful craftsmanship. Both create beauty. Both communicate emotions. Both help people understand life in deeper ways. This is why later critics called them the sister arts. In fact, Horace's statement influenced artists, poets, painters, and critics for many centuries. Many later writers explored the close relationship between literature and visual art because of this famous observation. Why is this principle important? Horace is teaching us something larger than poetry. He is teaching us that all true art communicates through beauty. Whether an artist uses colors, music, stone, dance, or words, the goal remains the same. To move the human heart. To stimulate the imagination. To help us see the world in new ways. This is why Horace's comparison remains meaningful even today. Let us quickly revise this slide. Ut pictura poesis means, as is painting, so is poetry. Horace compares painting and poetry as sister arts because both depend upon creative imagination, artistic skill, and careful craftsmanship. A painter creates beauty through colors, while a poet creates beauty through carefully chosen words. Neither artist merely copies reality, both transform ordinary experiences into meaningful works of art. The central lesson is that great poetry paints vivid pictures in the reader's mind just as great painting speaks silently to the viewer's heart. In the next slide, we will study another important aspect of Horace's criticism, where he explains the balance between natural talent, ingenium, and disciplined craftsmanship, ars, showing that lasting literary greatness requires both inspiration and practice.